Kravix the Destroyer had earned his name through 3 decades of mercenary work across the Outer Rim. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous armor plating and for arms that could crush steel, he commanded respect from the most dangerous fighters in known space. His reputation was built on taking contracts others wouldn't dare touch, leading assaults that seemed impossible, and never backing down from a fight. That was until the day he first encountered human special operations forces. The Centauri Mining Consortium had hired Kravix and his crew of 40 elite mercenaries to secure a disputed asteroid field in the Kepler 442 system. The mission seemed straightforward. Eliminate a small garrison of Earth military forces that had established an illegal outpost on asteroid designation CM 7749. Intelligence reports indicated 25 human soldiers, standard equipment, and minimal defensive positions. For a fighter of Kravix's caliber, it should have been routine work with an excellent payout. As his assault ship approached the asteroid, Kravix studied the tactical readouts with his characteristic attention to detail. The human outpost consisted of a small prefabricated base, several communication arrays, and what appeared to be basic defensive turrets. His thermal scanners detected the expected heat signatures of human personnel moving about their daily routines. Everything matched the intelligence briefing perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. "Boss, we're getting strange readings from the asteroid's surface," reported Zeph, his Altarian pilot whose species was renowned for their exceptional sensory abilities. Her 4 eyes could process light spectrums that most species couldn't even perceive, making her invaluable for reconnaissance missions. The electromagnetic signatures don't match standard human military equipment. Kravix dismissed her concerns with a wave of his lower left arm. Humans are primitive compared to most galactic militaries. They probably upgraded their gear with salvaged alien technology. Proceed with the landing. The assault began at 0600 standard galactic time. Kravix's team deployed from 3 different landing sites, using a classic pincer movement that had served him well in countless engagements. His mercenaries were a diverse group representing some of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Thackeray shock troopers with their natural resistance to energy weapons, nimble Vexian infiltrators who could turn nearly invisible, and heavily armored Goliath warriors whose thick hides could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. The initial assault went exactly as planned. The human defensive turrets opened fire with projectile weapons that seemed laughably primitive compared to the energy-based weapon systems used by most galactic militaries. Kravix's forces advanced steadily, their superior armor and weaponry giving them a clear advantage. Within 30 minutes, they had breached the outer perimeter and were preparing to assault the main base structure. That's when everything went wrong. The first indication of trouble came from Kravix's left flank. 3 of his Thackeray shock troopers simply vanished from his tactical display without any distress calls or weapons fire. One moment they were advancing on the communications array, the next moment their life signs flatlined simultaneously. Kravix tried to raise them on the comm system, but received only static. "Zortak, what's your status on the left flank?" he growled into his communicator. "Silence. All units, report in," Kravix commanded, feeling the first stirrings of unease in his battle-hardened gut. The responses came back sporadically. Several teams reported that their point guards had simply disappeared. Others mentioned strange sounds in areas where no enemies should have been present. Most disturbing of all, his Vexian infiltrators, who prided themselves on being able to detect any form of life, were reporting movement signatures that appeared and vanished without explanation. Kravix made the decision to consolidate his forces and push directly for the main base. Whatever was happening, concentrated firepower would solve the problem. His remaining 32 mercenaries formed a tight formation and advanced on the central structure, their weapons ready for anything. The human base appeared abandoned. The main doors hung open, and no defensive fire emerged from the windows or firing ports. Kravix's thermal scanners showed no heat signatures inside the structure. It was as if the entire garrison had simply vanished into thin air. "This has to be a trap," muttered Gorvex, one of his Goliath warriors whose species had survived countless battles through their natural paranoia and thick armor plating. "Of course it's a trap," Kravix replied. "But we're better equipped to handle anything these primitive humans can throw at us." Advance in formation. Sensors at maximum. They entered the base methodically, clearing each room with professional efficiency. The facility was indeed empty, but it showed signs of recent habitation. Personal belongings were scattered about. Meals sat half-finished on tables, and equipment hummed with residual power. It was as if the entire garrison had been interrupted in the middle of their daily routine and had simply walked away. In the command center, Kravix found something that made his blood run cold, despite his fearsome reputation. A single message was displayed on the main communication screen. "You are being hunted." Before he could process the implications of this message, his rear guard reported contact. Not the kind of contact he expected from a desperate last stand by cornered human soldiers, but something far more unsettling. His mercenaries described brief glimpses of movement, shots fired at targets that seemed to melt away before impact, and the growing realization that they were being stalked by something that understood warfare on a level they had never encountered. The psychological pressure began to mount immediately. Kravix's mercenaries were experienced fighters, but they were used to facing enemies they could see, understand, and predict. The humans they were fighting seemed to operate by completely different rules. They didn't engage in direct confrontation, didn't establish defensive positions, and didn't follow any of the tactical doctrines that govern civilized warfare. Instead, they seemed to have become part of the asteroid itself. They struck without warning from impossible angles, eliminated targets with surgical precision, and vanished before anyone could return fire. Most unnervingly, they seemed to know exactly where Kravix's forces would be at any given moment, as if they had access to his tactical plans. The turning point came when Kravix lost contact with his entire right flank simultaneously. 8 mercenaries, including 2 Vexian infiltrators who should have been nearly impossible to sneak up on, went silent in the span of 30 seconds. When Kravix led a team to investigate, they found no bodies, no signs of struggle, and no indication of what had happened to his missing fighters. What they did find was another message, this one scratched into the metal wall of a storage room. "We know you're here." For the first time in his 3-decade career, Kravix felt something he had thought himself incapable of experiencing: genuine fear. Not the healthy caution that kept smart fighters alive, but the deep, primal terror of being hunted by something beyond his understanding. His remaining 24 mercenaries were showing signs of serious psychological stress. The Thrakkeray, normally aggressive to a fault, were jumping at shadows. The Vexians, who relied on their superior senses for confidence, were reporting phantom contacts that appeared and disappeared too quickly to track. Even the massive Goliath warriors were clustering together for mutual protection, their usual individual confidence shaken by an enemy they couldn't see or predict. The final straw came at 1,400 hours when Kravix's most trusted lieutenant, a grizzled Corvin veteran named Thex, who had survived more battles than most species had fought in their entire histories, simply broke. He had been assigned to watch a critical corridor when the rest of the team heard him scream over the comm system. When they reached his position, Thex was alive but completely catatonic, staring at a wall where someone had drawn a simple human symbol, a skull with crossed bones beneath it. Below the symbol was a message written in perfect galactic standard. "This is what happens to those who threaten Earth." The mercenaries found no trace of whoever had gotten close enough to Thex to leave the message without him detecting their approach. Security footage from Thex's own helmet camera showed nothing unusual until the moment he began screaming, at which point the feed cut to static. Kravix realized he was facing an enemy that operated on principles completely foreign to everything he understood about warfare. These humans weren't just soldiers, they were something else entirely. They fought like ghosts, struck like lightning, and seemed to understand the psychology of their enemies better than those enemies understood themselves. The decision to withdraw came when Kravix accepted a truth that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was outmatched. Not by superior technology, not by overwhelming numbers, but by an approach to combat that rendered his decades of experience meaningless. These humans had turned the asteroid into their weapon, using every shadow, every corner, every piece of cover as an extension of their will. As his remaining forces retreated to their landing craft, Kravix couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His sensors detected nothing, but every instinct honed by 30 years of combat screamed that predators were tracking their every move. The withdrawal felt less like a tactical retreat, and more like prey being allowed to escape by hunters who could have struck at any moment. It wasn't until his ship cleared the asteroid's gravitational field that Kravix received the final message from the human forces. It came through on an open channel that shouldn't have been able to reach his ship's communications array. Tell your friends what you learned here today. We know who you are. We know where you come from. And if you ever threaten Earth again, we will find you. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly without emotion. It was the voice of someone stating a simple fact, not making a threat. Somehow, that made it infinitely more terrifying than any angry declaration of vengeance would have been. As word of Kravix's defeat spread through the mercenary networks of the Outer Rim, it marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in how the galaxy's most dangerous fighters viewed humanity. The species that had seemed so primitive, so limited by their reliance on chemical projectiles and relatively simple technology, had demonstrated something that no amount of advanced weaponry could replicate. They had turned warfare itself into an art form that transcended mere tactics and entered the realm of psychological domination. From that day forward, contracts involving potential conflict with Earth's military forces began carrying warnings that no mercenary company had ever needed before. Human Special Operations Forces may be present. Extreme psychological evaluation required for all personnel. Company assumes no responsibility for permanent psychological trauma. But this was only the beginning of humanity's reputation among the stars. 3 years after Kravix's encounter with human special forces, the galaxy's mercenary community had largely dismissed his account as the ravings of a fighter past his prime. Sure, humans had some tricks, but they were still a young species with primitive technology compared to the established galactic powers. The real test would come when they faced a truly professional military force, not just a collection of independent mercenaries. That test arrived in the form of the Vorthan supremacy's expansion into the Tau Ceti system. The Vorthans were everything humans were not. An ancient species with 10,000 years of military tradition, biotechnology that could adapt their soldiers mid-battle, and a rigid hierarchical structure that had conquered 17 different star systems. Their warrior caste was bred specifically for combat, with enhanced reflexes, natural armor plating, and the ability to see across multiple spectrums simultaneously. When they decided that Tau Ceti's resources would belong to the supremacy, few doubted the outcome. High Commander Vorthkeln stood in the command center of the dreadnought Eternal Victory, studying holographic displays of the Tau Ceti system with a cold calculation that had made him the youngest High Commander in Vorthan history. Intelligence reports indicated that Earth had established 3 research stations in the system, staffed by approximately 200 civilian scientists and protected by a token military force of perhaps 50 soldiers. The humans' presence here is illegal under Galactic Expansion Protocol 7. Vorthkeln informed his staff of senior officers, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never experienced military defeat. They will be given 1 standard day to evacuate their personnel and abandon their facilities. After that, we will remove them by force. Subcommander Thekvor, a grizzled veteran whose scarred carapace told the story of a dozen successful campaigns, raised a concern that had been troubling the senior staff. High Commander, there have been disturbing reports about human military capabilities from mercenary sources. Perhaps we should approach this with additional caution. Vorthkeln's mandibles clicked in amusement. You're referring to the Kravix incident? That failure of a mercenary was clearly defeated by his own incompetence, not by human superiority. Our intelligence indicates that humans still rely primarily on chemical projectile weapons and basic energy shields. They pose no threat to properly trained Vorthan warriors. The formal ultimatum was delivered to the human research stations exactly as protocol demanded. The response came back within 2 hours, transmitted on an open channel that every ship in the Vorthan fleet could receive. The research stations in this system are operating under valid scientific permits issued by the Galactic Council. We will not abandon our work. If you wish to remove us, you are welcome to try. What followed was not the desperate plea for negotiation that Vorthkeln had expected from an inferior force. Instead, it was a calm statement of fact that seemed to treat the entire Vorthan fleet as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The High Commander's combat instincts, honed by years of successful campaigns, detected something unusual in that response, but he dismissed it as human bravado. The assault began at dawn on the second day. Vorthkeln deployed 3 full battalions of his finest warriors, supported by atmospheric fighters and orbital bombardment platforms. The plan was a textbook example of overwhelming force. Establish orbital superiority, eliminate defensive positions with precision strikes, and then deploy ground forces to secure the facilities with minimal damage to valuable research equipment. The first indication that something was wrong came from the orbital bombardment phase. The Vorthan targeting systems, which could place energy bursts within millimeters of their intended targets, consistently missed their marks on human defensive positions. Not by much, just enough to cause cosmetic damage rather than the total destruction that should have resulted from direct hits. Navigation error, suggested the weapons officer, but deep scans confirmed that all systems were functioning perfectly. Atmospheric interference, theorized another officer, though the planet's thin atmosphere shouldn't have affected their targeting systems in any measurable way. The truth was far more unsettling. Human special forces had spent the previous night infiltrating Vorthan targeting systems through methods that Vorthan cybersecurity experts later described as impossible but demonstrably real. Instead of preventing the bombardment entirely, which would have revealed their presence immediately, they had subtly adjusted targeting coordinates by just enough to ensure that every shot missed its intended target. The ground assault began with Vorthkeln's finest shock troops deploying via drop pods to establish landing zones around each research station. These warriors were the elite of the elite, genetically enhanced soldiers who had never known defeat, equipped with adaptive armor that could adjust to any threat in real time. The first wave landed exactly where they intended, in carefully planned positions that would allow them to establish fire support for follow-up waves. What they found waiting for them changed everything the Vorthans thought they knew about human military capabilities. The humans hadn't built traditional defensive positions. Instead, they had turned the entire landscape into a weapon. Every hill, every valley, every seemingly innocent research structure had been transformed into part of an integrated defensive system that operated on principles the Vorthans had never encountered. Major Kethzar, leading the assault on Research Station Alpha, reported the first anomaly when his advanced scouts simply vanished. Not destroyed by enemy fire, not captured in any conventional sense, but completely gone as if they had never existed. Security footage from their armor showed normal advanced procedures right up to the moment the feeds cut to static. Probable equipment malfunction, Kethzar reported to his superiors, but privately he was disturbed by the complete absence of any logical explanation for what had happened to 5 of his best scouts. The main assault proceeded according to plan until Kethzar's forces reached the outer perimeter of the research station. That's when they discovered that the humans had somehow anticipated not just their approach routes, but their specific tactical doctrines, unit compositions, and even individual behavioral patterns of their commanders. Every move the Vorthans made was countered before they could complete it. Every tactical advantage they attempted to establish was neutralized by defensive measures that seemed to have been prepared specifically for that exact scenario. Most unervingly, The human defenders seemed to know what the Vorthan forces were going to do before the Vorthans themselves had made those decisions. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Vorthan warriors were trained from birth to believe in their genetic and technological superiority over other species. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that their enhanced reflexes, advanced armor, and sophisticated weapons would give them an insurmountable advantage in any conflict. But the humans were fighting like they had access to detailed intelligence about every aspect of Vorthan military operations. They knew exactly which wavelengths could penetrate Vorthan adaptive armor, precisely what psychological pressure points would disrupt Vorthan unit cohesion, and somehow had developed countermeasures for weapon systems that were supposedly classified at the highest levels of Vorthan military security. The breaking point came when Major Kethzar received a personal communication on his command frequency, a channel that should have been completely secure and known only to his immediate superiors. The message was brief and delivered in perfect Vorthan military vernacular. Major, your third-wave assault plan will result in the deaths of 67% of your warriors. We suggest you reconsider your approach. Kethzar's first instinct was to ignore what was obviously an enemy psychological warfare attempt. But something about the message troubled him. The casualty projection was delivered with the same cold precision he would expect from his own tactical computers, and the suggested alternatives showed an understanding of Vorthan military doctrine that should have been impossible for any non-Vorthan to possess. Against his better judgment, he ran the proposed assault plan through his own tactical analysis systems. The results were identical to what the humans had predicted: 67% casualties with minimal probability of mission success. It was as if the humans had access to better intelligence about his own forces than he did. The decision to probe human capabilities with a limited engagement proved to be a catastrophic mistake. Kethzar ordered a single squad to test the defensive perimeter, expecting either to encounter standard defensive fire or to uncover the source of the humans' apparent tactical advantages. Instead, he watched in horror as 7 of his finest warriors were systematically eliminated by an enemy they never saw. The engagement, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 43 seconds. Security footage from the squad's armor showed them advancing normally, then, suddenly, collapsing one by one with precision that defied explanation. Medical analysis of the fallen warriors revealed something that sent shockwaves through the Vorthan command structure. Each soldier had been eliminated by a single shot placed with surgical precision in the one vulnerable point of their adaptive armor. Not the obvious weak points that any competent sniper might target, but microscopic flaws in armor joints that should have been undetectable to visual observation. The humans hadn't just studied Vorthan armor. They had somehow analyzed it down to the molecular level and identified vulnerabilities that even Vorthan engineers didn't know existed. More terrifyingly, they had done this for every individual warrior, suggesting an intelligence-gathering capability that rendered Vorthan security measures meaningless. High Commander Vorthkeln, monitoring the assault from orbit, faced a decision that would define his career and potentially the future relationship between the Vorthan supremacy and humanity. Every tactical doctrine, every strategic principle, every assumption about military superiority that had guided Vorthan expansion for centuries was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that fought like they had been planning for this specific engagement for decades. The final blow to Vorthan confidence came when human forces demonstrated capabilities that violated the fundamental laws of physics as the Vorthans understood them. Warriors reported being engaged by enemies who appeared to be in multiple locations simultaneously, weapons that fired projectiles that changed direction mid-flight to strike targets behind cover, and defensive systems that seemed to predict incoming attacks before the Vorthans had decided to make them. Subcommander Thekvor, whose experience spanning 3 decades of successful military campaigns had made him the most trusted tactical advisor in the fleet, delivered the assessment that no Vorthan commander had ever been forced to make. High Commander, we are facing an enemy that operates beyond our current understanding of warfare. Our traditional advantages are not just neutralized, They appear to be turned against us. I recommend immediate withdrawal to reassess the situation." The words hit Vorthkeln like a physical blow. In 10,000 years of military history, no Vorthan force had ever withdrawn from an engagement with an inferior enemy. The genetic enhancements that made Vorthan warriors superior to most galactic species also made the concept of retreat almost incomprehensible to their psychology. But the evidence was undeniable. In 6 hours of engagement, the humans had demonstrated mastery of warfare that made Vorthan military doctrine seem primitive by comparison. They hadn't just defeated Vorthan forces. They had done so while making it clear that they could have achieved the same result with far less effort if they had chosen to. The message that ended the Vorthan assault came through on the same secure command frequency that the humans had somehow accessed earlier. It was addressed personally to High Commander Vorthkeln and delivered with the formal courtesy that one military professional extends to another. "High Commander, you have shown honor in your conduct today. Your warriors fought with courage worthy of respect. We offer you the opportunity to withdraw your forces with that honor intact. Continue this engagement, and we will be forced to demonstrate capabilities that will leave none of your warriors alive to carry word of what they witnessed back to your supremacy." The threat was delivered without emotion, without anger, without the bravado that typically characterized military communications. It was presented as a simple statement of fact, as if the humans were discussing atmospheric conditions rather than the potential destruction of one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Vorthkeln found himself facing a choice that no Vorthan commander had ever had to make: retreat in the face of an apparently inferior enemy, or continue an engagement that his most trusted advisors insisted could only end in the complete destruction of his forces. He chose retreat. The withdrawal from Tau Ceti marked the first time in recorded history that a Vorthan military force had abandoned an objective due to enemy action rather than strategic necessity. The psychological impact on the Vorthan supremacy was immediate and profound. If their elite warriors, with their genetic enhancements and technological superiority, could not defeat a handful of humans defending research stations, what did that say about Vorthan military supremacy in general? More importantly for the galaxy's mercenary community, word of the Vorthan withdrawal spread like wildfire through every cantina, spaceport, and hiring hall in known space. If the legendary Vorthan military machine couldn't handle human special forces, what chance did independent mercenaries have? The message was clear. Humans didn't just fight differently, they fought better. And they were only getting started. The Kalari Empire had built its reputation on patience and overwhelming force. Unlike the aggressive Vorthans or the chaotic mercenary groups that had previously tested human capabilities, the Kalari approached warfare with the methodical precision of master engineers. When they decided that humanity's growing influence in the Rigel sector required correction, they planned their campaign with a thoroughness that had made them the galaxy's premier siege specialists. Fleet Admiral Kalari Prime, Sethkon, commanded the largest expeditionary force in the Empire's 1,000-year history. 47 capital ships, each the size of a small city, accompanied by 300 support vessels, and carrying 500,000 of the Empire's finest warriors. Their target was humanity's most heavily fortified position outside the Sol system, the fortress world of New Geneva in the Rigel 7 system. New Geneva represented everything the Kalari respected about human engineering. Built into the surface of a titanium-rich planetoid, the fortress featured overlapping defensive fields, underground manufacturing facilities, and enough supplies to sustain a prolonged siege. By Kalari standards, it was a properly constructed defensive position that would provide an adequate test of their siege capabilities. The humans have finally built something worthy of our attention, Sethkon observed as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Rigel 7 system. His tactical displays showed the fortress world in exhaustive detail, mapping every defensive emplacement, every approach vector, and every potential weakness in the human position. The Kalari approach to siege warfare was legendary throughout the galaxy. They would establish a complete blockade around their target, eliminate any possibility of resupply or reinforcement, and then systematically reduce the defenders through precise application of overwhelming firepower. The process was slow, methodical, and had never failed in 3 centuries of continuous warfare. Intelligence estimates suggested that New Geneva housed approximately 10,000 human military personnel, including a full regiment of the special forces that had gained such troublesome notoriety in recent years. The fortress was well supplied and heavily defended, but ultimately limited by the same constraints that governed all defensive positions: finite resources, limited mobility, and the inevitable psychological pressure that came with being surrounded and cut off from support. Sethkin's plan was a masterpiece of traditional siege warfare. His fleet would establish a perimeter around the entire system, preventing any hope of relief or resupply. Bombardment platforms would systematically target defensive positions, gradually wearing down the fortress's ability to resist. Most importantly, the siege would continue for as long as necessary to break the defenders' will to fight. The humans will surrender within 6 standard months, Sethkon informed his staff with the confidence of someone who had conducted 17 successful siege operations. They lack the cultural conditioning for prolonged defensive warfare. When they realize that relief is impossible and their position is hopeless, they will accept honorable defeat. The siege began exactly as planned. Kalari forces established a perfect blockade around Rigel 7, with overlapping patrol routes that made any approach to the fortress world mathematically impossible. Long-range bombardment platforms began the systematic destruction of the fortress's outer defensive layers, working with the patient precision that characterized all Kalari military operations. For the first month, everything proceeded according to doctrine. The human defensive responses were competent, but predictable, following standard tactical patterns that any properly trained military force would employ. Return fire was accurate, but insufficient to seriously threaten Kalari capital ships. Communications intercepts suggested normal morale among the defenders, though with the expected signs of stress as the reality of their situation became clear. The first anomaly occurred during the second month, when Kalari reconnaissance drones began reporting inconsistent readings from the fortress world surface. Thermal signatures indicated far more activity than should have been possible given the estimated garrison strength, and electromagnetic emissions suggested industrial operations that shouldn't have existed within a besieged fortress. Probable sensor malfunction, reported Fleet Tactical Officer Kalari Secondary Vorthak, though private diagnostics confirmed that all systems were functioning within normal parameters. The humans may have developed some form of electronic countermeasure that affects our monitoring equipment. Sethkon ordered a detailed sensor sweep using equipment specifically designed to penetrate enemy electronic warfare capabilities. The results were puzzling. The fortress appeared to be operating at full capacity despite 2 months of continuous bombardment. Manufacturing facilities showed no signs of damage. Power generation systems were functioning at optimal levels, and defensive emplacements that had been confirmed destroyed were somehow operational again. The second anomaly was more troubling. Kalari patrol ships began reporting brief contacts at the very edge of their sensor range. Phantom readings that appeared and vanished too quickly for detailed analysis. These contacts didn't match the signature of any known spacecraft design, and their movement patterns suggested propulsion systems that operated on unfamiliar principles. Asteroid debris, suggested Navigation Officer Kalari 3rd Morvek, though the contacts showed clear signs of intelligent control and purpose. The bombardment has created unstable orbital mechanics that are confusing our sensor arrays. But Sethkin's combat experience, earned through decades of successful military campaigns, told him that something fundamental was wrong with the entire situation. The humans were behaving like a force that expected relief, not like defenders facing inevitable defeat. Their communications showed no signs of desperation. Their defensive fire remained accurate and coordinated, and intelligence reports suggested that morale among the garrison was actually improving as the siege progressed. The third month brought the first direct challenge to Kalari's siege doctrine. A supply convoy consisting of 12 heavily armed freighters somehow penetrated the blockade and reached the fortress world without being detected until they were already within the defensive perimeter. The ships appeared on sensors as if materializing from empty space, delivered their cargo with textbook precision, and vanished again before Kalari forces could mount an effective response. The implications were staggering. The Kalari blockade was supposedly impenetrable, maintained by some of the most sophisticated detection systems in known space. No conventional spacecraft should have been able to approach the fortress world undetected, much less deliver supplies and escape without suffering casualties. Stealth technology beyond our current understanding, admitted Fleet Intelligence Officer Kalari Secondary Thivek, whose reports had never before acknowledged technological inferiority in any area of military science. The humans appear to have developed capabilities that our intelligence services failed to identify. Seth Khan faced a decision that challenged everything he understood about siege warfare. His forces controlled the entire system, maintained overwhelming firepower superiority, and had followed every principle of successful siege operations. Yet somehow the defenders were not only maintaining their position, but actually seemed to be growing stronger as the siege progressed. The fourth month brought the revelation that transformed the Kalari perception of human military capabilities forever. Instead of gradually weakening under the pressure of prolonged siege, the fortress world began launching its own offensive operations. Human strike forces, using the same inexplicable stealth technology that had allowed their supply convoys to penetrate the blockade, began conducting surgical raids on Kalari positions throughout the system. These weren't desperate sorties by surrounded defenders. They were carefully planned special operations that demonstrated an understanding of Kalari fleet dispositions that should have been impossible to obtain. The attacks targeted not the obvious military objectives, but specific systems and personnel that would maximize psychological impact while minimizing the risk of casualties. Communication relays were sabotaged in ways that created cascading failures throughout the fleet's information network. Supply depots were infiltrated and their contents rearranged to create confusion rather than destroyed outright. Most unnervingly, several senior officers reported finding personal items moved or altered in their quarters despite being guarded by multiple layers of security. Fleet Admiral Seth Khan found himself fighting an enemy that operated by rules he didn't understand against objectives he couldn't predict. The humans weren't trying to break the siege through conventional military action. They were systematically undermining the psychological foundations that made Kalari siege warfare effective. The turning point came during the fifth month, when Seth Khan received a formal communication from the Fortress World's commanding officer. Instead of a plea for surrender terms or a desperate demand for negotiation, it was an invitation to discuss mutual strategic interests delivered with the courtesy of one professional military officer to another. Admiral Seth Khan, the message began, "Your siege has been conducted with the precision and honor that we have come to expect from Kalari military operations. We believe it would be mutually beneficial to discuss the strategic situation in this system before circumstances force us to demonstrate capabilities that neither of our forces may find pleasant." The communication was accompanied by detailed intelligence briefings that made Sethkin's blood run cold. The humans had somehow compiled complete tactical assessments of every ship in his fleet, including classified specifications that were supposedly known only to senior Kalari naval architects. They knew the exact number of personnel aboard each vessel, the operational status of critical systems, and even personal information about individual officers that should have been impossible to obtain. More significantly, they demonstrated knowledge of Kalari strategic plans that extended far beyond the Rigel 7 system. They knew about fleet dispositions throughout the Empire, ongoing military operations in distant sectors, and political developments that could affect future military campaigns. Somehow, While conducting a defensive siege, human intelligence operations had penetrated the highest levels of Kalari military and political leadership. The final demonstration of human capabilities came when the Fortress World's defenders revealed the true purpose of their seemingly defensive posture. What the Kalari had interpreted as a desperate last stand was actually an intelligence-gathering operation of unprecedented scope and ambition. During the 5 months of siege, human special forces had not only maintained perfect knowledge of Kalari fleet operations, but had systematically infiltrated every major ship in the blockade. They had accessed communication systems, reviewed tactical databases, and apparently conducted detailed reconnaissance of Kalari military technology and doctrine. Admiral, the human commander's final message explained, "We thank you for providing us with this opportunity to study Kalari military operations in detail. The information we have gathered during this siege will be invaluable for future strategic planning. We trust that the knowledge we have shared about the extent of our intelligence capabilities will inform your Empire's future policy decisions regarding humanity." The message was accompanied by a complete breakdown of how human operatives had penetrated Kalari security, accessed classified systems, and monitored fleet operations throughout the siege. It was delivered not as a boast or threat, but as a professional courtesy between military equals, one intelligence service sharing its methods with another as a gesture of respect. Seth Khan realized that he had never been conducting a siege at all. Instead, he had been participating in the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. The humans had used his own forces as unwitting test subjects to evaluate Kalari military capabilities, develop countermeasures for Kalari technology, and demonstrate their own strategic superiority. The withdrawal from Rigel 7 was conducted with the same methodical precision that had characterized the siege itself. But the psychological impact on the Kalari Empire was profound and lasting. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that patient application of overwhelming force would eventually break any enemy's will to resist. The humans had turned that doctrine against them, using the siege as an opportunity to gather intelligence, test their own capabilities, and deliver a message that resonated throughout the galaxy. Humanity didn't just fight differently, they thought differently. They approached warfare not as a contest of strength, but as a complex strategic game where victory was achieved through superior planning, deeper intelligence, and the ability to transform any situation to their advantage. Word of the Kalari withdrawal spread through the galaxy's military and mercenary communities like wildfire. If the Empire's legendary siege specialists, with their methodical approach and overwhelming numbers, could be outmaneuvered by human defenders, what did that say about the conventional wisdom regarding human military capabilities? The message was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity was not just another young species learning to fight. They were masters of warfare in ways that older, supposedly more advanced civilizations were only beginning to understand. The Obsidian Nexus was where the galaxy's most dangerous information was bought, sold, and traded. Hidden in the asteroid fields of the Proxima Centauri system, this neutral station served as a meeting ground for intelligence brokers, military contractors, and the kind of mercenaries who specialized in operations that required absolute discretion. It was here that the true scope of humanity's psychological warfare campaign began to reveal itself. Kravix, the former destroyer, sat in a dimly lit corner of the station's main cantina, nursing a drink that had lost its appeal hours ago. 3 years had passed since his encounter with human special forces, but the nightmares still came regularly. He was no longer the feared mercenary commander he had once been. Word of his defeat had spread through professional networks, and clients no longer trusted him with the high-value contracts that had built his reputation. "Mind if I join you?" The voice belonged to Subcommander Thekfor, recently retired from the Vorthan military under circumstances that official records described as voluntary early separation due to stress-related medical concerns. His scarred carapace, once a badge of honor earned through successful campaigns, now seemed to tell a different story about the changing nature of warfare. "Depends," Kravix replied without looking up from his drink. Are you here to tell me I was right about the humans? Or are you another intelligence broker looking to buy my story? Thekvor gestured to the empty chair across from Kravix. Actually, I'm here because I think we need to compare notes. What I experienced during the Tau Ceti withdrawal has convinced me that the human threat is far more sophisticated than anyone realizes. Over the next several hours, the two veterans shared their experiences with human special forces. What emerged from their conversation was a pattern that neither had recognized when viewed in isolation. The humans weren't just winning individual engagements. They were conducting a galaxy-wide psychological warfare campaign designed to fundamentally alter how other species perceived human military capabilities. Look at the evidence, Thekvor explained, producing a datapad containing intelligence reports from dozens of different sources. Every encounter with human special forces follows the same basic pattern. Initial contact appears routine. Defenders seem outnumbered and outgunned. Then, suddenly, the entire situation reverses itself in ways that defy conventional tactical analysis. Kravix studied the reports with the analytical mind that had once made him one of the galaxy's most successful mercenary commanders. Incidents involving human special forces have been reported in 17 different star systems over the past 5 years. In every case, supposedly superior forces have been defeated not through overwhelming firepower or technological superiority, but through psychological pressure that left survivors questioning their fundamental assumptions about warfare. They're not just winning battles, Kravix realized. They're creating legends. Every defeat gets reported, discussed, analyzed, and ultimately distorted until the truth becomes secondary to the reputation. The two veterans were joined by Fleet Intelligence Officer Kalari Secondary Thivek, whose career had effectively ended after his failure to predict human capabilities during the Rigel 7 siege. His presence at the Obsidian Nexus was evidence of how thoroughly the human campaigns had disrupted traditional military hierarchies across multiple species. I've been tracking human intelligence operations for 2 years, Thivek admitted, his usually precise Kalari diction showing signs of stress-induced irregularities. What I've discovered suggests that every engagement we've been aware of was carefully orchestrated to achieve specific psychological effects on different segments of the galactic military community. The Kalari intelligence officer presented evidence that painted a disturbing picture of human strategic planning. Each encounter with human special forces had been tailored to the specific weaknesses of the opponents involved. Mercenaries like Kravix faced psychological pressure designed to undermine their confidence in their professional competence. Military forces like the Vorthans encountered challenges to their genetic superiority complexes. The Kalari siege had been turned into a demonstration that superior numbers and technology could be rendered meaningless by better intelligence and strategic planning. They studied us, Thivek continued, not just our military capabilities, but our psychology, our cultural assumptions, our individual personality types. Each engagement was designed to create maximum psychological impact, not just on the immediate participants, but on anyone who heard about the results. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Zara Chun, one of the few humans who frequented the Obsidian Nexus. Officially, she was an independent researcher studying galactic military history. Unofficially, she was known to have connections with human intelligence services that made even the station's most paranoid information brokers nervous. "Gentlemen," she said, settling into an empty chair without invitation, "I couldn't help but notice that you're discussing my species' recent military activities. I thought you might appreciate some context for what you've experienced." The three veterans exchanged glances that held years of professional paranoia. Dr. Chin's presence at this particular moment seemed far too coincidental, and her casual approach to what should have been a highly sensitive conversation suggested either remarkable boldness or absolute confidence in her personal security. "Let me guess," Kravik said, his voice carrying the bitter humor of someone who had learned not to trust coincidences. "You just happened to be here tonight, and you just happened to overhear our conversation about classified military operations. Actually, Dr. Chen replied with the sort of smile that made intelligence professionals nervous. "I've been tracking your movements for the past 6 months. All three of you have been identified as key individuals whose experiences provide important insights into the effectiveness of our psychological warfare initiatives." The admission hit the three veterans like a physical blow. The implication that human intelligence services had been monitoring their activities, analyzing their behavior, and apparently manipulating their circumstances to bring them together at this specific time and place suggested a level of operational sophistication that none of them had imagined possible. "You're telling us that this meeting was arranged?" Thekvor demanded, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "Not arranged," Dr. Chen corrected. "Facilitated. We identified you as individuals whose experiences would naturally lead you to seek answers about human military capabilities. We simply ensured that your search for those answers would bring you to a location where productive discussion could take place." Dr. Chun activated a small device that generated a privacy field around their table, indicating that she intended this conversation to remain completely confidential despite taking place in one of the galaxy's most notorious intelligence-gathering locations. "Let me explain what you've actually been witnessing," she began. "Every engagement with human special forces over the past 5 years has been part of a coordinated campaign designed to establish psychological dominance over potential adversaries without resorting to large-scale warfare." The revelation that followed challenged everything the three veterans thought they understood about modern military strategy. Dr. Chun explained that humanity's approach to galactic security was based on the premise that actual warfare was inefficient compared to psychological warfare that prevented conflicts from occurring in the first place. "Consider the mathematics," she continued. "Traditional military campaigns require enormous expenditures of resources, result in significant casualties on all sides, and often create long-term political instabilities that require ongoing military presence to manage. Our approach eliminates conflicts before they begin by convincing potential adversaries that engaging human forces will be prohibitively costly regardless of the odds." The human psychological warfare campaign operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Individual encounters were designed to create personal psychological trauma in key military personnel, ensuring that their accounts of human capabilities will be colored by genuine fear and uncertainty. Intelligence operations gathered detailed information about enemy capabilities while demonstrating the ease with which human forces could penetrate supposedly secure installations. Most importantly, every engagement was carefully documented and analyzed to ensure that the resulting legends would spread through military networks in ways that maximize psychological impact. "The goal," Dr. Chen explained, "is not to defeat every potential enemy through direct combat. The goal is to create a reputation so formidable that most potential enemies will choose not to engage human forces at all." Thivek, whose analytical training allowed him to quickly grasp the strategic implications, asked the question that had been troubling all three veterans. "How extensive is this campaign? How many species have been targeted?" Dr. Chen's answer painted a picture of psychological warfare operations that spanned the entire known galaxy. Every major military power, mercenary organization, and intelligence service have been systematically studied, infiltrated, and psychologically profiled. Human special forces had conducted demonstration operations designed to showcase specific capabilities to specific audiences, creating a network of fear and uncertainty that extended far beyond the immediate participants. "We estimate that approximately 60% of potential military threats to human interests have been effectively neutralized without requiring a single major military engagement," Dr. Chen revealed. The reputation of human special forces has become a strategic weapon in its own right, one that grows more powerful every time someone like you shares their story with others. The psychological manipulation extended even to the way information about human capabilities spread through galactic intelligence networks. Stories about encounters with human special forces were deliberately structured to be both compelling and slightly unbelievable, ensuring that they would be repeated frequently while remaining difficult to verify independently. Each retelling added new details, enhanced the mysterious aspects of human capabilities, and reinforced the fundamental message that humanity was not to be underestimated. You've turned warfare into mythology, Kravix realized, his professional appreciation for elegant strategy overcoming his personal resentment at having been manipulated. Every defeat becomes a legend, every legend becomes a deterrent, and every deterrent prevents actual conflicts. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Mythology is far more powerful than technology in determining how conflicts develop. A reputation for invincibility based on a few carefully orchestrated demonstrations is worth more than the largest fleet if it prevents those fleets from ever being deployed against you. The conversation continued through the station's artificial night cycle as the three veterans came to understand the true scope of what they had experienced. They hadn't just been defeated in individual military engagements. They had been carefully selected participants in a psychological warfare campaign that had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. More disturbing was the realization that their current meeting was itself part of the campaign. By bringing them together to share their experiences and understand the strategic context, human intelligence services were ensuring that their future accounts will be even more compelling and psychologically effective when shared with other military professionals. So what happens now? Fekvor asked as the artificial dawn began to lighten the cantina's atmospheric simulation. We go back to our respective communities and spread word about human psychological warfare capabilities, further enhancing your reputation? That's entirely up to you, Dr. Chen replied, deactivating the privacy field and preparing to leave. Our psychological warfare campaign succeeds regardless of whether you choose to share what you've learned tonight. The reputation of human special forces is already established. Your experiences have served their purpose. As she stood to leave, Dr. Chan paused to deliver one final observation that would haunt all three veterans for years to come. The most effective psychological warfare doesn't rely on deception or false information. It relies on revealing truths that are so unsettling that they fundamentally change how people think about conflict itself. Everything you've experienced about human military capabilities is absolutely true. We've simply ensured that the truth serves our strategic objectives. The three veterans sat in silence for several minutes after Dr. Chen's departure, each processing the implications of what they had learned. They had been unwitting participants in a campaign that had reshaped galactic military dynamics, and they now faced the knowledge that their future actions would continue to serve human strategic interests regardless of their personal intentions. The truth about human special forces was spreading across the galaxy, carried by exactly the people who had the credibility and motivation to make others believe it. And with each retelling, humanity's reputation grew more formidable, their psychological dominance more complete, and the likelihood of actual military conflicts more remote. 5 years after the Obsidian Nexus meeting, the galaxy had quietly restructured itself around a single unspoken truth. Humanity's special forces had become the ultimate arbiters of military conflict. What began as isolated encounters between human defenders and various hostile forces had evolved into a comprehensive system of psychological deterrence that maintained peace through fear rather than treaties or alliances. The Galactic Mercenary Guild's annual convention on Kepler Station provided a perfect window into how thoroughly human psychological warfare had transformed military culture across known space. Where once the convention had been dominated by aggressive recruiting for high-risk contracts and boastful displays of military hardware, it now resembled a support group for warriors grappling with an enemy they couldn't understand or effectively counter. Commander Sarah Martinez of Earth's Special Operations Command stood at the observation deck of her stealth frigate, watching the traffic patterns around Kepler Station with the trained eye of someone who saw strategic implications in everything. Officially, she was here to conduct routine liaison activities with galactic military contractors. Unofficially, she was overseeing the final phase of humanity's most ambitious psychological warfare campaign. Status report. She requested from her intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander James Chun, whose relationship to Dr. Zura Chun was known only to a select few within Earth's intelligence hierarchy. The transformation is complete, Chun reported, reviewing data streams from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Hostile activity against human interests has decreased by 91% over the past 18 months. More significantly, conflicts between non-human species have decreased by 43% as military leaders increasingly seek diplomatic solutions rather than risk engaging forces that might have human support. The numbers represented more than tactical success. They indicated a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approached conflict resolution. The mere possibility that human special forces might become involved in any given dispute had become such a powerful deterrent that most potential conflicts were resolved through negotiation before they could escalate to military action. Commander Martinez activated the ship's communication array and opened a secure channel to Earth's strategic command. This is Operation Mindbridge. Phase 5 is complete. Request permission to proceed to Phase 6 implementation. The response came back within seconds, carrying the authority of Earth's highest military leadership. Permission granted. Initiate final protocols. Phase 6 represented the culmination of decades of strategic planning that extended far beyond simple psychological warfare. What the galaxy had witnessed as individual demonstrations of human military capabilities had actually been carefully orchestrated steps toward establishing Earth as the ultimate guarantor of galactic stability, not through conquest or occupation, but through the creation of a reputation so formidable that it functioned as a strategic weapon in its own right. On Kepler Station, the convention's main auditorium was hosting a panel discussion titled Adapting to New Realities in Galactic Security. The panelists represented some of the most experienced military contractors in known space, each carrying scars both physical and psychological from encounters with human special forces. Kravix, now serving as a strategic consultant rather than an active mercenary commander, addressed an audience that hung on his every word with the desperate attention of professionals trying to understand an enemy that operated beyond their comprehension. The fundamental question, Kravix explained, is not how to defeat human special forces in direct combat. That question is based on assumptions about warfare that are no longer relevant. The real question is how to operate in a galaxy where human intelligence capabilities make traditional military secrecy impossible, where human psychological warfare can turn your own forces against you, and where the threat of human intervention has become a factor in every strategic decision. The audience response was telling. These were beings who had spent their lives mastering the art of warfare, yet they listened to Kravix with the deference typically reserved for oracles and prophets. The psychological transformation was complete. Humanity had become something beyond ordinary military opposition, elevated to the status of a natural force that could be acknowledged and respected but never truly challenged. Subcommander Thekvor, representing the growing number of former military officers who had transitioned to consulting roles after their encounters with human forces, presented an analysis that would have been considered treason just a few years earlier. The Vorthan supremacy has quietly restructured its expansion policies to avoid any systems with potential human interests, he admitted to an audience that included representatives from multiple species' military hierarchies. This is not cowardice. It is strategic wisdom. The cost-benefit analysis of engaging human forces consistently indicates that diplomatic solutions are more efficient than military ones. The admission represented a profound shift in galactic power dynamics. The Vorthan supremacy, whose military might had shaped interstellar politics for centuries, was essentially acknowledging human hegemony in matters of strategic importance. More significantly, they were doing so voluntarily, driven by their own rational assessment of changing military realities rather than through defeat or coercion. Fleet Intelligence Officer Thivek, whose insights into human capabilities had made him one of the galaxy's most sought-after strategic advisors, presented the mathematical proof of what everyone in the auditorium already understood intuitively. Human psychological warfare operates with an efficiency ratio that makes traditional military campaigns obsolete, he explained, displaying charts that reduced warfare to pure mathematics. The resources required to maintain Earth's reputation for invincibility are approximately 1% of what would be needed to achieve equivalent strategic objectives through conventional military means. The numbers were staggering in their implications. Humanity had achieved galactic military dominance not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through superior understanding of how military psychology could be weaponized. They had turned the galaxy's own military culture against itself, creating a system where the fear of human capabilities was more powerful than any actual demonstration of those capabilities. Dr. Zura Chun, whose presence at the convention was officially explained as academic research, delivered the presentation that would define the new paradigm of galactic security. Her analysis of human psychological warfare campaigns was comprehensive, detailed, and utterly terrifying in its implications for anyone who might consider challenging Earth's growing influence. Phase 6 of humanity's strategic implementation involves the transition from reactive psychological warfare to proactive galactic stability management. She announced to an audience that listened with the focused attention of beings confronting their own obsolescence. The revelation that human psychological warfare operations had been conducted in phases, each building toward a predetermined strategic objective, confirmed what many had suspected, but none had dared to articulate. Humanity's rise to galactic prominence was not the result of fortunate circumstances or superior technology, but the execution of a comprehensive strategic plan that had been generations in the making. Phase 6 represented something unprecedented in galactic history: the establishment of a single species as the ultimate arbitrator of interstellar conflict without requiring formal treaties, occupying armies, or political subjugation. Earth's reputation had become so formidable that other species voluntarily restructured their military and political policies to avoid potential conflicts with human interests. The beauty of this system, Dr. Chen explained, is that it requires minimal ongoing resource commitment from Earth while providing maximum strategic benefit. The fear of human intervention maintains stability more effectively than any peace treaty or military alliance. The implications extended far beyond military considerations. Trade routes that had been contested for centuries were now considered neutral territory under implicit human protection. Territorial disputes that had sparked conflict for generations were resolved through arbitration rather than warfare, with all parties accepting that military solutions might attract unwanted human attention. Most significantly, the galaxy's various species were increasingly cooperating on scientific and technological projects, recognizing that shared progress was preferable to the risks associated with military competition. Commander Martinez received regular updates on the convention proceedings through channels that demonstrated humanity's comprehensive intelligence capabilities. Every conversation, every private meeting, every casual exchange of information was being monitored and analyzed to ensure that Phase 6 implementation proceeded according to plan. The psychological integration is exceeding projected parameters, Lieutenant Commander Chen reported. Former adversaries are not just accepting human hegemony. They're actively promoting it as a stabilizing factor in their own strategic planning. The transformation was so complete that resistance to human influence had become psychologically impossible for most species. The combination of demonstrated capabilities, successful intelligence operations, and carefully cultivated reputation had created a reality where challenging humanity was synonymous with strategic suicide. On the final day of the convention, an event occurred that would be remembered as the formal acknowledgement of humanity's position in galactic affairs. Representatives from 12 major species, including several that had never formally encountered human forces, signed the Kepler Accords, a voluntary agreement that established humanity as the preferred mediator for interstellar disputes. The Accords were significant not for what they contained, but for what they represented. No human representative had requested this arrangement, no threats had been made, and no political pressure had been applied. The galaxy's military and political leadership had voluntarily chosen to formalize humanity's role as the ultimate guarantor of galactic stability. Commander Martinez watched the signing ceremony from her observation deck, knowing that she was witnessing the completion of humanity's most successful military campaign. Not a single major battle had been fought, no territories had been occupied, and no governments had been overthrown. Instead, humanity had achieved strategic dominance through the simple expedient of convincing everyone else that resistance was futile. The final communication from Earth's Strategic Command contained orders that would have seemed impossible just a decade earlier. Phase 6 complete. Begin transition to peacekeeping operations. Military expansion protocols are no longer required. For the first time in galactic history, a species had achieved absolute military dominance without needing to use it. The fear of human special forces had become so pervasive, so thoroughly integrated into galactic military culture, that the mere possibility of their involvement was sufficient to maintain peace across hundreds of star systems. As the convention concluded and delegates returned to their respective worlds, they carried with them the knowledge that the galaxy had entered a new era. Not an era of human conquest or occupation, but an era of stability maintained through the simple understanding that some fights were not worth starting. The mercenaries who gathered at cantinas across the galaxy no longer spoke of human special forces as enemies to be defeated or obstacles to be overcome. They spoke of them as forces of nature to be respected and avoided, like black holes or solar storms. The transformation from military opposition to natural phenomenon was complete, and, with it, humanity's position as the galaxy's ultimate arbiters of conflict was established permanently. In the end, the most feared warriors in galactic history had achieved their greatest victory not through the application of superior violence, but through the demonstration that superior intelligence, properly applied, could make violence itself obsolete. The galaxy was at peace not because humanity demanded it, but because everyone else had concluded that peace was the only rational choice when dealing with forces beyond their comprehension. The legend had become reality, and reality had become legend. Humanity's special forces were no longer just soldiers. They were the guardians of a new galactic order built not on conquest, but on the simple understanding that some mysteries are too dangerous to investigate.